Taming the High Cost of College, Episode 21.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello, and welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge, and today we have an interview with Troy Onink. He is the owner of a company called Stratagee, where they develop software that helps financial planners figure out how to pay for college for their clients and families. He also writes for Forbes on their blog and does a lot of great information about how to pay for college. And that's his area of expertise. He's been helping families and designing software and involved in the financial planning side of college for over 20 years. After the interview, we're going to talk a little bit about scholarships. We have a question from a frustrated parent who is struggling with how to find scholarships that are appropriate for her son. And we'll talk a little bit about scholarships and answer her questions. As always, the show notes are available at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/21. So anything that we mention in today's program, you can go there and download it or get a link to the appropriate locations, as well as get in contact with our speakers. All right, without much further ado, let's go ahead and jump in with the interview with Troy. All right, today I'm sitting down with Troy Onink. He's the owner of a company called Stratagee, which creates software for financial advisors to help them plan and pay for college. And he also is a prolific writer. He has a blog at Forbes called College Crossroads, and he also writes for Investment News and a number of other publications. So Troy is what I would consider an expert, especially on the financial side of college. So Troy, welcome.
Thank you very much, Brad.
Before we jump into any details, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story? How did you get involved in college planning, and how did you come to build the software and all that kind of stuff?
Well, 22 years ago, when I started as a financial advisor in this profession, there was a very quick realization that the baby boomers at the time were faced with this large uncertainty of how much college was going to cost them, where their children might go to college, and so forth. So it really wasn't even a matter of, at that time, of coming up with a strategy for the family. It was even just trying to identify what the costs were going to be to start. And at that point, there were no U.S. News, there were no Forbes rankings, there were none of those things, there were no websites, no college tax credits, 529 plans had not been created yet. So it was very much the college planning infancy, if you will. And so I just jumped in and started researching as much as I could, and then we started building software at that point because we needed a tool to help us scale up the ability to assess the family situation and ultimately determine what their best strategy was, using a financial planning approach to helping them pay for the high cost of college even then, and still be able to preserve income and assets for retirement. So as time went on, I was consulting with mutual fund companies and broker-dealers and helped launch a new mutual fund division of a global bank. And we leveraged my expertise in college planning among the financial institutions across the country. And we happened to be ranked number one among all mutual fund companies in the U.S. by Barron's for our performance across all of our different funds. And we were, out there in the news a lot, and I was on the stages of all the financial conferences that were going on, talking about this topic of college planning and how it related to retirement. And back even then, 15, 20 years ago, I had trademarked the phrase that college is a toll booth on the road to retirement. And that's kind of a theme that we've stuck with along the way. And then the mutual fund division was sold in 2006, and that's when we created Stratagee so that we could really focus on helping advisors and parents determine what a family's best strategy is and how to go about implementing that. And that's why we've created subsequent versions of software that do most of what we really want to help the family be able to accomplish as they go through this process. And the bottom line is, the cost of colleges has continued to escalate. And so the people that do have assets are really looking at what they have been able to accumulate. And now at this point in time, when their children or grandchildren are getting ready to go to college, they're having to deal with this high cost and realizing that a lot of that asset base that they've created may go out the window in the next 6 to 10 years as their children go off to college. So it's really a matter of applying the same things that I did when I started, which is helping the family through a financial planning process determine what their best strategy is to pay for college so that they can continue to preserve those assets and income streams as they go into retirement.
Right, great. So then you wrote software that helps figure it all out. And I guess we talked earlier that software is only available to financial advisors?
That's correct. Yes, we do have, at different times, we do research projects using the software with consumers and media companies and the like, and that helps shape what we do in continuing to enhance the software for advisors and as they work with their clients. And we continue to roll out new features within the software as things evolve with financial aid and with financial planning and tax strategies and investing. So it's a continuous process of improvement. And the good news is we're able to simplify this very complex process using the software so that it makes it streamlined, because if the families had to provide all the information that they normally would have to if they were completing the financial aid forms, this process of using the software would be very cumbersome, but we're able to streamline that so we can really move things along for the family, and we can assess things very quickly so that it ultimately is going to help the family identify what their situation is and then be able to make the proper financial planning changes to help them best pay for their share of the cost of college.
Okay, so if you're providing software to advisors, I think you might be the guy to ask, how do you know if your advisor understands college, and how do you know if you should find someone that specializes in college?
Great question. I will tell you, Brad, that having given about 400 presentations just to financial advisors in the last 10 years on this topic, and having worked with many of the largest financial firms in the country for 10, 15 years, that a lot of the advisors out there, they really are not focused on the college planning area. And so they may have a cursory knowledge of, how to save for college and things like that, but they don't really understand the late stage college planning, which is when your children are getting ready to go off to college and basically you don't have much more time left to save. It's time to figure out how you're going to pay. And that's what we in the industry refer to as late stage college planning. And so most advisors, I'm going to say better than 90% of the advisors out there, really don't have a good grasp at all of this late stage college planning component. And it's, even though they may have heard, the presentations, they may have some of the information there available to them, it's really a matter of them focusing more on the retirement end of this overall financial planning spectrum and managing assets for their clients who are in retirement and have accumulated their wealth and are using that now to provide income throughout retirement. So that's really the traditional financial planners' focus in general, is to look more at retirement. And this college planning piece of it is, kind of the stepchild, I guess, if you will, of financial planning. It just does not get the focus that it should, because most advisors are more concerned about bringing in assets that they can manage for their clients in retirement because they've already accumulated the assets. And the biggest reason for that is because college planning is complex. If you think retirement or estate planning is complex, college planning is infinitely more complex because it involves 4 key areas. One of them is the college selection or college admission. And then the other one is financial aid, and there's 2 different types of financial aid. There's merit aid and there's need-based aid. And then the third area is what I refer to as tax aid, and that's really tax saving strategies and the use of tax credits available while you're paying for college. And then the fourth area is the family's personal resources. In other words, when we get to the net cost of college for a student at a given institution, how is the family then going to fund their share of that cost with their own resources, with their income, their assets, possibly their ability to borrow. How do they do that? And so it really pulls together 4 different areas that really are not part of the financial planning or the financial planner's scope typically. So you wouldn't take a certified financial planner, as an example, is not going to be well versed in college admissions or financial aid. They may very much have a good knowledge of the financial planning process and how that family could pay their share of the cost. They may understand some of the tax component of it, but they are not going to be well versed in the admissions or the financial aid aspect of those 4 categories I mentioned. Likewise, we wouldn't expect a CPA to understand all the financial planning process or the admissions or financial aid. And if we flip the coin the other way and look at admissions deans and enrollment management deans and financial aid officers, their job is not to understand taxes and financial planning. So it creates what I call the college chasm, if you will, when it comes to advice, because there's this hole where families typically fall into because they're not getting the advice because it involves all these different areas. So they may only be getting one piece of it, and they really need all 4, and they need to bring that together with somebody, an advisor like yourself, who understands college planning and understands those 4 areas and can bring those 4 areas and those respective levels of expertise together into one strategy. And that's why the financial advisor community out there has really fallen short in this area of college planning. Yet this is the biggest expense that parents are going to face as they go throughout their adult life. They're going to be dealing with other expenses that are costly, sure, but none that are as concentrated as college, because a college education today, a 4-year education, might cost as much as they paid for their home, and they only have 4 years to pay for it, not 30 if they took out a 30-year mortgage. So they really have to figure out a way to fund this in a short period of time. So it's a real hardship for the family, and it's the biggest financial thing that they're going to be dealing with. And it's a time when they need the most financial planning expertise, but yet they're not giving it. So advisors like yourself are really setting themselves apart out there in the financial planning industry in terms of helping families as they go through this process. And so what you're doing is not only appreciated, Brad, but it's also extremely valuable to the family. And you've been taking this approach for quite a long time, and you're well versed in this area of college planning. And there are advisors who are just now starting to realize, hey, I should be offering this type of service and really getting a solid knowledge base in this area so that I can better help families. And so, our organization is starting to work more with advisors who are moving in that direction so that we can be part of the solution, just like you're part of the solution for the family.
Right. So let's say that a typical family that might be listening to this might have a student, 17-year-old in high school, maybe a junior, and they're in the thick of college now. They're starting to think about, well, we got to do testing, we got to do visits, and we have to figure out this financial piece. So I think most families have, maybe 2 or 3 options, which would be, one is use the advisors you have and hope they know what they're doing. Another option is to do it yourself. And then the third option is to find a specialist that specializes in college. Would you agree with that?
I agree 100% with that. And the first 2 options, people can see some results doing that, but it's such a complex area because you have to be able to bring together all those areas of expertise, like I mentioned. And, the answer to almost every college planning question is, it depends. And the reason is because there are so many caveats and so many what-if scenarios that you need to be able to understand those things, those landmines, if you will, so that you can really navigate through to what the family situation truly is and what they can do about that situation, whether they can make some changes to improve their aid eligibility or improve how they can better afford a given college with their financial resources. So the problem with college planning is it is complex, but the do-it-yourselfers, there's a lot of people that are out there looking on the internet and gleaning information from different websites, and the information that's out there, and I will tell you that I even see this with some financial advisors, so-called college planners, I refer to them as, who really are just trying to reposition assets into life insurance and annuities because they're life insurance salespeople, and this is a way for them to earn a big commission, but at the same time, it can be very misleading. And so they're...
All right, I'm going to stop you there because I think that's a key point. So explain that a little further. So it sounds like what you've said is there's financial advisors that understand college and do it well, and there's financial advisors that claim to be college advisors, but they're really looking to do more sales and sell financial products, not really do much college planning.
That's correct. And
so how do you tell the difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. And one of the things that cottage industry, if you will, of those people are really trying to, I'm not saying that they're not trying to help the family, but their only strategy to help the family in their eyes is to reposition their assets that would normally be counted or known as being reportable on the financial aid forms. They just try to reposition them into other types of accounts or products that are not going to be counted on the aid forms. The life insurance will not be counted on any of the aid forms. Harvard and Holy Cross, in their supplemental questions on the CSS profile, they will ask for that information. But by and large, the life insurance cash values that families have are not going to get counted for financial aid purposes. Annuities do get counted on the CSS profile, and that's another very large misperception out there. A lot of people, especially in the insurance industry, they profess that the annuity does not get counted. Well, it doesn't on the FAFSA, but it does on the CSS profile. There's two financial aid forms.
Right.
And so repositioning assets into those types of products can get them off the table for financial aid purposes. In other words, the financial aid calculation then will not count those assets, and ultimately that lowers the amount that the family is expected to contribute toward the cost of college. But the other side of this, Brad, is, as you're aware of, a lot of times the parent's income is not going to bring their expected family contribution down to a level where they're going to qualify for any need-based financial aid anyway. So in repositioning assets, it might lower how much the family is expected to pay for college, the number that they're expected to pay. But if it's not ever going to bring it down below what the cost of attendance is at a given university, it's still not affecting their aid eligibility. So in other words, if the cost of attendance at a state university is $26,000 per year, and by repositioning your assets, which they count at 5 or 5.64%, depending on the aid formula, if it's in the parent's name, if you're going to move $200,000, and now that reduces the parents or the student's EFC, the amount that they're expected to contribute toward the cost of college, $200,000 at 5% is $10,000 a year. So if it dropped their EFC from $40,000 down to $30,000, yes, it lowered the amount the family is expected to pay, that number. But in the aid process, the college is then going to take their cost of attendance, their sticker price for everything, and they're going to subtract out the family's share of that cost. Well, if we brought it from $40,000 down to $30,000, but the sticker price is $26,000, then the family is still going to have to write a check for the sticker price of $26,000 because their share of that cost is actually higher. It's the $30,000. So doing the math, if we went the other way and said, okay, the cost of college is $40,000, and we went and you drop your EFC from 40 down to 30, now the family's minimum amount toward that cost of college is going to be 30. So in that case, it would help. But in many cases, repositioning assets to qualify for need-based aid is not always going to bear out at the end of the day in terms of getting more grant money or scholarships, because a lot of times at these state universities, even if you qualify for some financial aid, the first line item almost these days that they're going to offer is going to be a Stafford loan. So it may not have really helped you in terms of getting more grant or scholarship money.
Right. So as I've been working on it, I actually just did a video on this topic. So what I figured out is I've helped about 140 families in great detail actually do their plan. And I've used the life insurance strategy once. And of those 140 families, I've used an annuity strategy 3 or 4 times. So it's a legitimate strategy among many, many, many strategies. But it's also a strategy that I think gets way overused, and people don't understand that there's a lot of costs involved to that strategy as well. So if you're not going to get a large benefit because you did it, you probably shouldn't have done it.
I would agree with that. And the other component of that is really important is that if you've now taken these assets off the table and kind of locked them up for financial aid purposes, we have to remember you still have to pay your share of the cost of college. Even though we lowered that share that you have to pay, you still have to pay whatever your share is. So now what resources are you going to use to help pay for college? If you've locked up everything, you've kind of, you've lowered the amount you're going to be expected to pay, but you just put handcuffs on yourself too.
Exactly. So I guess circling back around to finding that specialist, let's brainstorm some ideas. What kind of questions would you ask in the interview process if you were sitting down with someone that was offering to help with college? How would you, again, kind of vet them a little bit to figure out if they are in fact an appropriate fit for your situation?
Yeah, I think given what we just said, one of the best questions you could ask initially would be, how are you paid? And, so are you paying them a fee? And then, how else do they get paid? How else do they make money? If it's only through life insurance sales, then that should be a warning anyway. If they are affiliated with a broker-dealer, then they're able to offer additional financial products and counseling and advice in other areas, such as investment management. So they may have a Series 6 and a Series 7 so that they can sell mutual funds and variable products and things like that, stocks and bonds. And so really understanding what their scope is from a financial planning perspective, and also how they get paid. So those are two big questions. How do you get paid, and what do you have the authority to sell, the licenses to sell? And what's your background in this? How give us some examples of how you may help families determine what their best strategy is, because that's really what at the end of the day, it has to be. If you're doing this from a purist position like you do, then it is really about the family strategy and how to help them. It's not about what product might be applicable to their situation or that you might be able to fit into that strategy. It's what is your best strategy, and then you go from there.
Right. What about, I think a question I might ask would be, can you explain the difference between the FAFSA and the CSS profile, and how many of these types of forms have you been involved with, to see what kind of experience they have with the financial aid side of it?
Mm-hmm.
That would be a question I hear occasionally, and I think, oh, that's a good question.
That is a good question, because depending on where the child is looking to go to school, they may be, some schools might just require the FAFSA, some are going to require the FAFSA and the CSS profile, and a lot of them, are not well versed at all in the CSS profile, and those are typically it's used at the more elite colleges, and they have a whole different set of admissions processes, and even the financial aid is different there, because they don't offer merit aid, they just offer need-based aid, and so that form is extremely important at that point.
Correct. All right, so can you tell me a little bit more about the software? So if we, I guess, is there a way that we can find advisors that use your software?
We don't really put out a list of advisors that use the software at this point in time, but we do work with a number of broker-dealers around the country. Cambridge Investment Research is a firm that we've been partnered with for many years. And as I said before, I used to run the national accounts with a lot of these broker-dealer firms across the country. And Cambridge is one that we had always been very closely involved with, because their advisors do take this more holistic approach, and they're fee-based typically, and they're going out and trying to just help the families with whatever their need is with their clients' given objectives and so forth. So we've been very closely aligned with Cambridge and a number of other broker-dealers that are out there, Commonwealth, LPL, and to some degree Raymond James. But there is not a list that exists as who uses the software today.
Okay, so then it's a little bit of a search process to find somebody that's qualified. Once you do find someone that's qualified, do they tend to work with your existing advisors, or how? What have you seen in the past? What can people expect from someone that helps with the financial side of college?
Well, if you're working with a financial advisor that is well versed in this area of college planning, they're going to be able to give you a very good indication ahead of time, before you even start applying to or visiting colleges, as to where your child may be able to get into college, get aid, and which ones you can ultimately afford based on your resources and any aid that may be available. Going back to my comment about that toll booth, if you think of it this way, we're looking down the highway in front of you on this road to retirement, and there's a section of this road to retirement that we call college. And on that road, we're going to have all these road signs. There's all these colleges out there in front of us, these different exits, and there's toll booths at those exits. So we want to be able to identify ahead of time before we even get down that road. We want to be able to look ahead and say, where can we get in? Where can we get aid? Which ones can we afford? But then working with you as an advisor that is specializing in this college planning area, then you're able to provide the family with their best strategy to pay those tolls so that they can stay up to speed for retirement. And so that strategy is almost like cruising through the easy pass lane. If you've ever gone to a toll booth at rush hour, that's what happens. The same thing happens with college. You got millions of students and parents who are trying to assess this whole thing of whether or not they can get into college and the financial aid component of it. And so they show up at the last minute and they're all rushing to try to get the information and everything else. And meanwhile, you've already done that with your clients. And so you're really giving them that strategy that acts almost like the easy pass. So you can, while every lane for the toll booth is jammed full of these other people, you can cruise through that easy pass lane, take care of the cost of college as wisely as possible, and then stay up to speed for retirement.
Yeah, thank you. Great. So let me ask a timing question then. So if you're thinking, well, maybe I'm going to get some help financially, or maybe I'm not, but in either way, when do you need to start making financial decisions and financial planning when it comes to the late stage college? When does that usually start?
Well, late stage college planning really is, in my mind, is really, there's a lot of overlap with the accumulation phase. So you could say when you're thinking about buying a house, refinancing a house, or saving for college, that's really a time when you need to be thinking about what you're going to be able to do down the road when it comes time to pay for college. And so as early on as possible, I will say, is the general answer. But to be more specific, grades 9 through 12 are really the kind of that sweet spot, if you will, of what I refer to as late stage college planning. And the earlier you start in that process, the better off you're going to be. Don't think, well, we're too far away from college. We don't know where my son or daughter might be interested in going. Don't make that mistake. You need to start now, because then we can look ahead and say, all right, here, if we did go to this school or that school, or pick a generic category of schools, elite private schools or state universities, or second tier private colleges, whatever, we can look at those in general, or we can actually bring up specific colleges and we can focus on that and say, okay, 4 years from now, if this is the school your child is interested in, this is what it would look like for admissions and financial aid for you, and either you will or you will not be able to afford that particular school based on how things are situated today. I do presentations all over the country all the time to parents, and I see people, and then I might be back another year, and they may come up again, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, I need to meet with you, or I need to meet with an advisor because we're closer now. And even though I've hounded them, pounded this notion into their head that they need to come in now, not wait 2 years or a year or 6 months, because you need to implement things as early on as possible so that you can reap the most reward from that in terms of paying for college wisely as possible. So the sooner you start that, the better. If you think, oh, I'll wait, then you've made the first mistake.
Right. If you're concerned enough about college that you've listened to us talk about college for a half an hour, then it's time for you to get started, most likely, because there's things you can do as parents of a freshman, as parents of a sophomore. Now, it might be generic planning, saying, well, we don't know the college, we don't know the major, we don't know a lot of details, but are we on track for financial aid? Are there tax strategies we should be implementing now? Are there things that we can do, to kind of lay the groundwork for when we do have a junior and senior, and we can make things go a little more smoothly then?
That's right, because these things, the financial really should be the foundation of the decision or of this whole process. because even if the child can determine what they want to major in, and even the school that they want to go to pursue that major, if they cannot get into that college or they can't afford it, then all of that time and effort is going to be wasted, and it's going to actually accentuate the frustration of the process. So getting the financial piece laid early on is really important, because then we know, again, where we may be able to get in, get aid, and ultimately which ones you can afford. And as you said, Brad, there are different things that can be done, and people continue to make major financial decisions between now and when their children are going to go to college, whatever that time frame is. It might be, okay, should we go on these vacations? Should we buy a rental house? Should we buy a vacation home that we can ultimately retire to? There's all kinds of things that people do, and then all of a sudden 4 years later, their kids are going to college, or 2 years later, and they're saying, okay, what can we do now? Which colleges can we afford? And it's like, hello, this
Right.
decision you just made is the one that you shot yourself in the foot. So
Yeah, yes. And another big one, I think, is people that are saving sometimes aggressively for college, but they're doing it in the wrong type of account, let's say.
yes.
So then you save aggressively from your freshman through your junior year, and then at the end of your junior year, you discover that you should have done it differently. And sometimes there's things we can do to fix it, but sometimes we can't, and or maybe not quickly enough. So just getting some, again, make sure you're on the right path early on. When you stretch it out, it also takes a little of the pressure and the stress off as far as timing, because you get really busy your junior and senior year.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add to that is, if we look at the other end of the spectrum, you've got parents that make a high income, and they may think, well, we're never going to qualify for any aid, and so it's not even worth us pursuing that. We're not even going to fill out the financial aid forms. Well, yeah, that might be true. It might be true only while you have one child in college, but as soon as you have two, both of them may qualify for some need-based financial aid. Or maybe there are maybe you just have gotten some bad information, and based on your income level, your child may qualify for all kinds of financial aid. So that is also something that I think a lot of people, because especially the higher income earning families, they may be based, on that income alone, expected to write a check for sticker price, and so they're paying, as much as 65, closer to, even with some of these schools today, we're inching up there closer to $70,000 per year. And so now all of a sudden you're looking at $250,000 to $300,000 for one child to go to college. So, you really better, if you're in that situation, taking this step to find out what you can or cannot do is really important, because it's even more important for those families, because they're going to be paying a much larger price for college than families that might be a little bit further down on the income scale.
Yes, I would agree with that. All right, so we're going to wrap things up here. We've a little over a half an hour already. So, but before we go, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, because I always ask my guests for 3 quick tips. They could be related to the stuff we've just talked about, or they could be completely unrelated, but just 3 things that parents or students that are, in high school thinking about college might want to pay attention to, or do, or buy, or whatever it might be. Any ideas?
Okay. Yeah, I have 3 that I can give you. The first tip is what we just discussed, and that is, don't wait. Get the advice you need now, and ask those questions of the person you're going to visit as to whether they're really well versed in college planning, like you are, Brad, or not. That's the first one. Don't wait. The second one would be that college selection drives a lot in terms of what happens on your financial aid picture for that given college. So a school, an elite school, a Harvard, a Stanford, a Duke, a Davidson, Wesleyan's, University of Chicago, they're not going to offer merit aid money. So you can have the child with the best grades and the best SAT score, and it won't get you a dime of financial aid at those institutions. So you may have to step down a notch to get all of that merit aid money that you may have heard about out there, where they may be offering anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 in merit aid a year at those schools. And that's the second tip. So that college selection will dictate a lot in terms of financial aid, whether they offer merit aid at all, and if they do, what that amount might be each year. And then the second part of that is the college selection also will dictate which financial aid forms you're going to have to complete. And under the FAFSA and under the CSS profile, you may look completely different for financial aid eligibility. So what school you're looking at is going to dictate a lot in that sense. And then the third thing is you really have to take a financial planning approach to paying for college, and that's looking at all those areas that I mentioned earlier. You have to involve all four areas: the college selection, the financial aid, the tax aid or the tax strategies, because in some cases, at least at some schools, the family may not qualify for need-based aid, so you may have to focus more on tax savings. And the tax savings, if you're able to achieve, $5,000 in tax savings, that's the same as getting a grant or a scholarship. So that's why I call it tax aid. And then last, that fourth component of your family resources and how you use those to pay for college. You have to look at all four of those areas and develop a strategy. So the three tips would be: don't wait. The second one is college selection matters more than you think. And then the third one is that you need to know what your best strategy is, and it has to be your strategy. It can't be what you've heard from your friends, your family, and your coworkers, or some other acquaintance. It has to be based on your specific information, your situation, and your preferences.
All right. Well, great. We appreciate all the great input. If people want to learn more or get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can visit the website, which is Stratagee.com, and it's spelled STRATAGEE.com.
Great. So I will put all this information in the show notes. It will be at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. So anybody can get whatever they need. Troy, I appreciate you spending the time with us and giving us a lot of great information. And we will talk to you soon.
My pleasure. Thank you, Brad.
Have a question? Brad is accepting questions from his listeners now. Record a question at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com and get it answered on one of the future episodes.
Today's question came to me via email from Joanne. Joanne writes a question about scholarships, and her question essentially says, where do I find scholarships, and is it worth the time and effort to search so hard? Because my student is very average, and so is our family as far as income, etc. So that's a great question I hear a lot. And the reality of scholarships is that for a lot of families, scholarships are going to be a tough challenge. In other words, you may not be able to find enough scholarship money and actually win the scholarship money to make it worth your time. Of course, the flip side of that is there's a lot of people that win large scholarships, and because of those large scholarships, it makes a substantial savings for college. So how do you know if you should pursue scholarships and what types of scholarships are out there and all that kind of stuff? Well, to start with, I want to break scholarships into two categories. One type of scholarship out there is what we would call the institutional scholarship. In other words, you apply to a private university, let's say Georgetown, and Georgetown offers you a $10,000 leadership scholarship or the $20,000 presidential scholarship. Those scholarships are tied directly to the college that you're attending, and you may get awarded this type of scholarship at many of the schools that you apply to. Now, these types of scholarships generally are associated with private schools, but some public schools will also offer them. But these types of scholarships are almost a tuition discount, so to speak. In other words, the only way you can use this scholarship is to go to that particular institution, and instead of your tuition being $40,000 at Georgetown, it's now $30,000 or $20,000, depending on the size of the scholarship that you're awarded. The other type of scholarship out there is what I would call the private scholarship, and those are the scholarships that come from other outside corporations and organizations. So Coca-Cola and Kohl's offer large scholarships. Your local businesses near your high school may offer scholarships. The clubs and organizations you belong to may offer scholarships. Where mom and dad work may offer scholarships. Those types of scholarships are private in that it's not tied to the institution that you're going to attend. This basket of scholarships is a lot more work because there's, the sky's the limit as far as how many you can apply to and where you can search for it. So you can spend a lot of time looking and applying to these types of scholarships. I think everybody should pursue the institutional scholarships where they plan on attending. In other words, you need to look into the private schools and public schools where you're attending, figure out if they offer scholarships by hitting their website and other things, and pursue those scholarships. When we get to the private scholarships, however, I've had a lot of people talk about them, but I've had very few people actually do the work and win. But there's people out there that have written books about how they won a bunch of scholarships and paid for college. But winning that full ride and paying for college through a bunch of scholarship applications is relatively rare. And if you think about it, it's so rare that if you are successful at it, you can literally write a book about it and sell that book. It's not common for families to be able to get substantial scholarships. It is common that you might get 1,000 or 2 from here or there as you go through the process. And I've had a few families, I had one family apply for 40-some scholarships. They won 7 of them for a total of $39,000. Now that's the exception, that's not the rule. Some families will apply to 5 or 10 scholarships and get nothing at all, or perhaps get one award for $3,000 or $5,000. So the bottom line when it comes to scholarships is you really need to figure out, well, how much time and effort do you have? How much time do you have between now and when college starts? If you've got a year or two, if you've got a sophomore or junior, you've got a little more time, and there's a lot of other factors involved. I've actually put together a questionnaire. It's available at our website at tamingthehighcostofcollege/21. It's part of the show notes for this episode. In there we have a 10-point questionnaire that will help you, work through some of the details as to whether or not you should pursue scholarships. I also have available a couple different podcasts out there. Episode 14 is a presentation of my own about scholarships, so I go through the different types of scholarships and how to pursue them and that kind of thing. And episode 5 is an interview with Kim Stazala, and she's the author of Scholarships 101, A Real-World Guide to Cash for College. So both of those episodes are great if you want to learn more. And as I mentioned, there's also the questionnaire. If you enter your email at tamingthehighcostofcollege/21, you're able to download some scholarship resources, including the questionnaire, to help you determine if scholarships is something you should or shouldn't be pursuing for your situation. In the end, for most families, the answer comes back of one of 3 things. One is, well, we're just going to ignore scholarships. And that's fine. Some families are better off spending their time and effort pursuing other things that may provide bigger bang for the time, so to speak. Or perhaps you're really late in the game and it's too late. Some families, I think the answer is you should just pursue the low-hanging fruit. You're not going to do 40 scholarship applications. You're going to do 4 or 10 or something where you're going to find scholarships where your student is highly qualified because of where they work and play or where your mom and dad work and play. So things like, well, what's available at your local high school where the application pool is small? What's available where mom and dad work? Again, where the application pool is small. Are there any special clubs or organizations or skills that the student has? Are they part of a certain ethnic group? Those types of things where there's not going to be a lot of competition for those types of scholarships. And then finally, the third answer would be some families may benefit from doing an all-out scholarship search and applying to many scholarships and putting a lot of time and effort into the scholarship process. It's hard to know where you land, and again, that's what the questionnaire is about, to help you think through some things. We'll also have a list of scholarship websites and other links and resources that can help you determine if you should be pursuing scholarships at all. And you can also go back and listen, as I mentioned, to episodes 5 and 14 to get a lot more information about some of the details on scholarships. So I hope this helps. We're going to wrap things up now. This is the end of episode 21. I appreciate you guys listening, and if you would go to iTunes and or Stitcher and leave us a review or comment, that would be great. If you have questions of your own, you can go to tamingthehighcostofcollege/questions and either send us an email type of question, or you can actually record a question and put it out there, and we can answer it on a future podcast or get back to you via email if we need to. That's all for now. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns 2 companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.